Little is known about the generative cores of board and video games, let alone talked and discussed on the internet. But what does generative cores even mean? Before we even start talking about generative cores, let's start by talking briefly about cores in general. If you're familiar with the vocabulary of game design, you might have heard about the MDA framework: mechanics, dynamics, and aesthetics of a game. This framework can be really useful to analyze the components on a modular scale, but for this video we'll talk about these components in the form of cores. Cores themselves can be made up from anything, from abstract components like actions players can take in a game, to more physical components, like pieces included in board games, the layout of a level in a video game, etc. In short, cores are a sort of entity that can be made up of any component that comes in a game, and cores themselves can be made up from other cores. With that in mind, let's analyze what a generative core is. Generative cores generate the structure, hence the name generative, and this structure affects other cores of the game in a way that makes them profound, that allows other cores to unfold and reach their full potential. If you've ever played any game in which you've thought that all its mechanics fit so cleverly, chances are you have played a game with generative cores. Let's define what a generative core is by the 3 laws of generative processes. 1. Generative cores create a structure of cores by adding a new and significant core one step at a time. To understand what a generative core is in actual gameplay, let's analyze 2 games which feature cores that are generative: chess and Carcassonne. Knowing the rules for both these games would be very useful to fully understand the contents of this video, but I'll explain them both very briefly in case you're not familiar with either of these games. Chess is played on an 8x8 board divided in squares that are light and dark in color, organized in a checker pattern. Players then take turns playing as black and white, controlling 16 pieces known as chess pieces. Each type of piece has its own rules that specify how to move. Every turn, players move a single piece, capturing other pieces in the process if the destination is occupied by an enemy piece. A player wins the game by performing a checkmate to the king piece, basically cornering it with no chance of escape. On the other hand, Carcassonne is another board game in which players build a landscape. Every turn, players draw a single tile from a stack of piles, known as the draw pile, and use it to extend the current landscape in some way. Tiles themselves are marked with different landscape features, and players can connect the drawn tile to any tile that has been placed on the board if both tiles have their landscape features match in some form. Players can then use a special piece called a meeple or follower to claim a landscape feature for themselves. After the landscape feature has been completed by being fully built, players gain points depending on the type of landscape feature and its size. So, going back to the 3 laws of generative cores, the first law states that generative cores create a structure by adding a new and significant core one step at a time. One of the generative cores of chess is the action of moving a chess piece, as every time a player moves one of its pieces, something new is added to the match. Moving a piece adds a new threat or a latent strategy from a plethora of possibilities that will become relevant in future turns. In other words, whenever a player makes a movement in their turn, something new and significant is added to the match, the structure that is being generated. In Carcassonne, the generative core is the action of building the landscape. As every turn, players add a new core to the structure, the existing landscape, in the form of a tile. Tiles added by the players create a new dormant core that either creates a new landscape feature that did not exist before or continues what has been built. As turns pass, players generate the structure of landscape, enhancing previous cores and making larger, coherent cores in the form of landscape features. Finally, before moving on, let's review the definition of the first law once again. A generative core creates a structure by adding a new and significant core one step at a time. This last part is often overlooked, but it is crucial to the generation of structure. As we have seen, cores can take any form, from movement of pieces to adding tiles. When a new core is added to the game, it changes everything, which makes it exciting. It's important to understand that these cores slowly create a structure of bigger cores. For example, in chess, history of moves is generated throughout the match. The structure of cores is a bit more obvious in Carcassonne, as immense landscape features are slowly built through the entirety of the game. Adding cores one step at a time allows players to receive feedback on how pieces are being moved, on how the landscape is being expanded. Think of it as a painter carefully analyzing how to continue a portrait after having made a stroke with a brush. The painter requires visual feedback to verify how everything is coming together in the portrait. Similarly, players also need this feedback to see how their actions are affecting the current state of the game. How would you feel if the game didn't tell you how your moves affect the entirety of the match? Would every play you make feel significant? You could argue that not having this feedback would even make your turns feel completely luck-based, random even, if it didn't tell you how your actions are affecting the match. This feedback is very important, not only because it assesses players on finding the next best play, but because it gives this feeling that every turn, every play, every decision matters.